Hey everybody, it's Eric Johnson. Hey listen, today's gonna be pretty cool. I'm starting to kind of feel my mojo again. Oh shit, just a second. All right. So yeah, maybe I don't have my mojo back. That was not the best beginning, just fine. Okay, here's the thing. Here's a couple of things. First of all, the cover. First of all, this is going to be about Pokemon Box. Okay? Pokemon Box is one of the 4 chapters dedicated to the 4 boxes that are around the country somewhere. Not the lion's share box. That's the big box with the most treasure. But all the other 4 have substantial treasure in them. And the one that drew my attention first and seemed the most understandable first is Pokemon Box. So I'm gonna go over what I've done so far in my thinking, but then also Forest Fen Box does not look. It seems kind of at face value, kind of not obvious where it is, but kind of the area it's in. And then also I would say Appalachian Trail, which we know the Appalachian Trail is very long, and I know there's a whole thing about Vermont, and that guy found that little, I call it Snoopy face, kind of looking down, but he did find it's very, very, very close. Now, of course, when JCB, John Collins Black, did his, I think he said in the thing, he was kind of doing it in the way his son did it, and he saw his son doing this kind of rough drawing of a treasure map. How rough is his drawing to the actual thing? A thing in Vermont was very interesting, but there's also something fairly close to his home where he grew up in Statesville, North Carolina, which he said he went to Appalachian Trail more than once and hiked. That could also maybe be it. Anyway, I was looking at the cover, and you see the 4, the prongs sticking out. It's X marks the spot, right? X marks the spot. And right in the middle of the X, of course, we see, the clouds and kind of heaven and everything. But I thought maybe those 4 prongs pointed to north and southeast and south and northwest. And, so I tried to compare the pictures, like this one would be pointing towards, wait, how would this work backwards? So this one would be pointing towards the northwest? Yeah, or no, yeah. And then this one's pointing to the northeast, and that's, the moon rock, and that, I think, is the Pokemon Box cover of it. That's, I think, is that future and present that has the Bitcoin? And then whatever, you get the point. I don't think it's true though. I don't think the pictures match at least what I'm already starting out with. I think that's just what it was, just X marks the spot. Then if you look at the back, there's no things at all. You just have the other ones like the pirate ship and all that. All right, enough about that. So that could be a rabbit hole for me, but I didn't let it be because I don't think there's anything there. Now, the Pokemon Box. As you're seeing in the picture behind me, that's kind of where he says he buried it. But let's get to how he does that. And so I've done throughout the book. I put a number of things to stop and read, see the pink dots or yellow or blue or whatever I'm using. And those are kind of things I thought were worth looking at. Now I could come back later and do a whole nother one on this and expand on what I figured out, but I'm going to stick with this right now. I have a little bit of Coca-Cola, a little bit of Diet Coke. Yeah, I'm starting to feel better though. Those last 3 videos I did, I was starting to learn. I was starting to get back into it again. And it was just, I didn't feel that comfortable. Now I'm starting to feel more loose, and I was kind of like, man, maybe I can start my channel up again and really get a lot of subscribers and stuff. I said, Johnson, that just always makes you pressured. You never do well when you're worried about subscribers and stuff like that. Just go back to just enjoying yourself. That's what I'm going to do. Because quite frankly, I don't care. All right, so the Pokemon box. Now, this starts off with the concept. Hope you don't mind me holding it up here. This starts off with the concept that, well, I'll just say it. This is how it starts out. I was 5.5 years old when my parents crammed our hard case Samsonite luggage into the hatchback of the family station wagon and then hitched up our Jayco pop-up camper. And this was the start of a trip to Houston. And on the trip to Houston, now they're starting out in Statesville, North Carolina, which is north of me in the eastern coast. They're going to go down south, down near the Gulf. They're going to go to New Orleans. They're going to go to Houston. And they're going to circle back up through the Ozarks, back up to North Carolina. So it's kind of an oval. So that's how it starts out. He's going on this trip with his parents to New Orleans, Houston, and then back home through the, up, getting a little bit more north. He brims to the excitement. I'd never been to the city like New Orleans. He waxes eloquent about New Orleans and how cool it was. First time he was ever at a what do you call them, a door that electric door that opens and closes at the store, etc., at the hotel, etc. Now, now keep in mind, they're staying at a hotel. But they're camping all along the way, right? They're camping all along the way. That's much better. So, even though they're going to, New Orleans and then Houston, blah, 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 they're always camping. And I mean, a pop-up Jayco is pretty cool because I went back and watched some vintage videos of people who had recently bought vintage 85 and 84 or 86 or whatever Jaycos, and they were showing that they bought them for like $400 on YouTube. And they're kind of cool. They're kind of cool little campers. You can stay in them, you can live in them. I think they have there's a potty in there, there's a sink in there, you can bring water along. They're pretty sophisticated for being, and you pop the top and you ratchet it up, and you have mesh windows and keep out the mosquitoes, and you have a little table and you have little beds, and they're pretty cool. So that's what they did on this trip. Now they did stay at a hotel in New Orleans, but the majority of the trip they were camping out. They like to camp out. If you've ever camped out, camping out's really cool, to be outside listening to the birds and the squirrels and the roars of a grizzly bear coming through the woods to eat your food that you've got stored inside your tent. Yeah, our excursion would be circular. We'd head southwest through New Orleans, make our way, trek back up to the Ozarks. He talks about New Orleans. Now, what he says is, our plan for the next day was to visit the French Quarter in New Orleans. If you don't mind, it's easier to read. I was down before, I was the first one awake. It took forever for the adults to get ready. They get out on the street in the French Quarter, and he's walking along, and he is 5.5 years old. 5.5 years old. And he hears music. My pace quickened. I rounded a street corner ahead of them. It was then that I heard the silky tones of a baritone saxophone. It was then that I heard the silky tones of a baritone saxophone. Coming from inside this bar, he goes in. I don't know if it's black bar or white bar, but whatever, or a mix, probably a mix, right? But whatever it was, he goes, and I make that distinction just because he presents this. He's a kid coming in, this little kid, 5.5 years old, and he gets up on a chair at the bar. So I can only imagine if it was primarily black bar, it must have been pretty hilarious for them. And in fact, he says, bartender says, "Are you okay, kid?" The bartender asked me. I didn't really hear him. This music, this place. He loved this place. The bartender did a double take. I didn't even notice. Excuse me, young man. The doorman or the guy that was at the door that he had gone past, he comes up, he goes, where are your parents? The guy from the door, he goes, I looked at him down the street. I replied, he chuckled and shot a glance at the bartender, who shrugged back. Okay? They both seemed friendly. The whole place did. So you came in here all by yourself, the doorman said? Yes, it's really nice. Both men laughed out loud. Right? Then his parents show up and he leaves. But this, he never forgets this bar, I'm assuming it is, and he never forgets the music. He loved the sound of that silky baritone saxophone. He talks about those 14 days of sightseeing and camping were one grand and amazing delight. I spent hours turning over rocks and riverbeds and streams, salamanders and crawdads I found. I hunted for grasshoppers during the day and chased fireflies after sundown. I tiptoed around dozens of hopping frogs on visits to campground bathrooms in the dark. I witnessed a bald eagle, or my first American eagle, soaring through the sky. That trip was my first real adventure, a real taste of the great expanse of natural beauty and majesty our country has to offer. Every day I saw new landscapes. So, again, they are traveling in their Jayco. At first I was going Rayco. I mean, before I looked it up, and then I went back to doesn't matter, Jayco trailers. That's what they're primarily doing. They're staying in a Jayco trailer for 14 days going around the country. Yes, they stayed at a hotel in New Orleans. Maybe they stayed at a hotel when they got to Houston. I think they went to Houston later. I don't think any of that matters. Okay? I don't think any of that matters. It was almost 40 years later in 2016 when Kimberly, his wife, and he, have you ever seen a picture of him and his wife? They look like brother and sister. Very close looking. I mean, they look very similar, but that happens a lot. Remember Mick Jagger with Bianca? Everyone said he's married his doppelganger, the female version of his doppelganger. But I mean, a very attractive couple. But that, I see that every once in a while where I go, this couple, they look alike. I guess they like their looks. Nothing wrong with that. So, 40 years later, they're in Portland. And in Portland, they run across this very odd phenomenon. All these people, well, I'm using my cell phone, so I can't use it. But all these people are walking around in the city of Portland, and they're looking through their cell phones at something. Now, this is, I believe it's called augmented reality. Is that what it is? You have virtual reality, which I love. I love my virtual reality. I love my meta glasses. I've got Quest 2 and 3. I'm still using my 2s because I had problems getting my 3 to work. I think it's because I was using the wrong email address when I had to connect the parrot. Kind of stupid. But I really enjoy my Quest 2, so I'm still using it. I'm gonna switch over to the Quest 3 pretty quick. But anyway, augmented reality is where you take your cell phone and you have the augmented reality app on it, and you can punch in the augmented reality. They call it that because, for instance, you can walk around in your house and you're looking at your house on your phone, but if you're running this program, say you have it set up where you're hunting for certain creatures, and you suddenly see them intertwined with the reality of your home, but then you're seeing maybe something pop up behind an actual chair in your house, but it's the program, and maybe it's kind of a cartoon figure and it looks like it's in your house. They're very cool. I haven't used it yet, but anyway, what was happening this day in Portland was that these people were looking. It was a Pokemon augmented reality app, and they were looking for Pokemon characters in Portland. So they're walking on the streets, and they're literally you know, the Pokemon character may be on their augmented reality, and they're all using the same program, of course, because it's a contest of some sort. Well, let's read what it was. It has something to do with, I think, the way he does this. Okay, these are masses of people congregating in groups, stalked out in street corners, huddled around fountains, and sharing benches that lined city parks. City awnings were occupied. They had their arms out, phones extended, peering at, or rather through their devices. They were all searching for Pokemon. Listen to what Pokemon did. Hold it 1 second. This is kind of freaky. Pokemon Company, the first augmented reality company app, was released about a week prior to them being in Portland and seeing this contest, I guess you could call. In 1 week, now I'm assuming you paid for the app. People paid for the app. If you can imagine this number, it's mind-boggling. Week prior, Pokemon Company had released the first augmented reality app. Over 280 million downloads in a week. I didn't bother going back and looking, but what if it was $9.99? 280 million downloads in the first week of this augmented reality app. There is a point to me bringing this up, and there's a point to him having it in here, I'm convinced. Because at first I was like, I don't want to learn all this about Pokemon. I don't really care about Pokemon. And then I got the gist of what JCB is doing, which is very clever. People, young and old alike, were searching on this augmented reality app for Pokemon of all colors, shapes, sizes, and rarity. The largest digital treasure hunt in history was unfolding all around us. Yet Pokemon Go. Oh, Pokemon Go. I called it Pokemon Company. Maybe I need to put on my other pair of glasses. Pokemon Go. Created a massive worldwide phenomenon. The guy who created Pokemon, is Japanese, founder and app, and he had originally he wanted to be an entomologist. He wanted to be a bug doctor, and he always had a love of studying bugs and all that and searching for bugs. But he then got into video gaming and software development, and he created this thing that basically is a game. I've never played it. It's basically a game, though, where you see different characters that are based on bugs, and they're bug-like, and they're cartoonish looking, and they evolve. Like they'll evolve, go through evolutionary stages, right? Tajiri, the guy who created the app, got the idea for a game where insects would engage in battle. From the seedling of an idea, Pokemon Red and Pokemon Green was born. 150 different insect-inspired creatures in addition to one extra Pokemon who was mysterious and very hard to find. Okay, you get the gist, right? There's a couple of Pokemon cards in this box. That's part of the reason he talks about it. And they're worth quite a lot. They're very, very rare Pokemon cards, and big collectors. Pokemon collecting cards are a very big deal and can get quite expensive. Here is the Pokemon box. It's got silver inlay in it. I mean, silver like what do you call it? Silver. He says this puzzle box for Pokemon, in my opinion, is perhaps the most impressive piece of artistry Seth Gould ever created. Seth Gould's the one that created all the boxes for his hunt, all 5 of them, the lion's share, the big one, and then the other 4 that are in a little bit lesser value, and they're kind of playing around the United States, you know, just a few states away instead of being halfway around the country. And these boxes all are puzzle boxes that you have to figure out how to open. Big deal. And he said if he said he actually leaves instructions for people who don't want to figure them out. Okay, that's cool. Here's Froakie and Greninja. Now, Froakie's a little frog guy, and Greninja's the one next to him. I think Greninja is part of the evolution series of Froakie. Anyway, all right, here we go. Here's the start, more or less. Because of all the precious memories I had of my road trip to Houston, keeping in mind I went to New Orleans and then Houston, and then up and back, circled back to Statesville in North Carolina. Because of the precious memories I had of my road trip to Houston, I decided it would be fitting to leave a treasure box not far from some place I had visited along that journey, right? Now that journey is a long journey. It was a 14-day journey. Not to be redundant, but start out at Statesville, North Carolina on the East Coast, go southwest down to Louisiana to New Orleans, go northwest up to Houston in Texas, and then circle back to Statesville by going back east again. 14-day trip. Camping along the way. We know they stopped in New Orleans. They did stay at a hotel every night. He was very excited to stay at a hotel. Had never been one, never had the doors open and close on their own, all that. It was very big news to him. He's only 5.5. Since it been such a long time ago, all right, let's try this yet again. Because of the precious memories I had on my road trip to Houston, I decided it would be fitting to leave a treasure box not far from some place I had visited along that journey. Since it had been such a long time ago, I figured it might be a fair bit of work. So I decided to go and search for the Pokemon. Obviously now we're going into the realm of fantasy to provide us clues to... have you ever seen anything stupider in your life than me trying to wear glasses? He's you know, okay, he's going to have Pokemon's a system. What does that mean? I'll tell you what I think it means. So I decided to go and search for a Pokemon who might be capable of assisting me on my trip. A Pokemon who might know the area I wanted to travel to. At a local jazz bar, not forgetting New Orleans, jazz bar, I assume, certainly playing saxophone music, which is usually jazz related, baritone saxophone music, I might add, to remind you. I happened to meet a type of Pokemon called a Froakie, F-R-O-A-K-I-E. His cute face reminded me of an army of croakers I had encountered on my trip long ago. He's talking about when he said he was out looking for he saw hopper frogs and fireflies, and he was obviously out in the woods somewhere on the trip, I assume, when they were staying in their Jayco camper. Not the hotel. He's not searching for firefly. He's not outside, you know, searching for frogs. There's a reason I have to bring that up. I didn't feel right about capturing him. I used charm and enthusiasm. I told the Froakie all about the treasure box. And they decided right then to go place the treasure box. Okay? How about right now? I responded with a smile. He nodded in agreement, and off we went. So the Froakie, this Pokemon, Froakie, frog-ish, water. Apparently all of these characters in Pokemon kind of have their areas of expertise. They have a thing called a buffalo something, and it looks more like a buffalo, so it's more like land. And then they have a bunch that are kind of water related, like a frog. I thought about scheduling some training for the Froakie to assist him in becoming his more capable Greninja self. Now, the Greninjas are, I think, the next step evolutionary for the Froakie. Like I said, they have different evolutionary levels of these creatures, of these characters, right? I figured this would help us along. Besides, it was probably the least I could do to show my appreciation. But time was short. I decided the idea would have to wait. But I picked up a jar of flies from the local pet store, blah, blah, blah. Now, I taped a lily pad to the top of my backpack, and the Froakie climbed up and made himself comfortable. Now, he's looking to place the box, the Pokemon box, with the help of a Pokemon, which makes sense, right? Listen to this. Next line. As we drove, we listened to some John Coltrane. They're on the road going to plant the box. And remember, JCB said he first looked at maps to determine where he was going to go and to kind of fit his themes of each chapter that he had come up with. And then he said, of course, he had to do the hard work, which was actually get out and decide where to place the box. So he's on the road. It's a little fanciful. He's with a Pokemon. As we drove, we listened to some John Coltrane. It seemed appropriate. Who is John Coltrane? John Coltrane was a renowned, very famous, very good baritone, saxophone, jazz musician. I mean, I think John Coltrane even played with Miles Davis. No false sweet, no small feat, because Miles Davis, if you don't know, is a very demanding, perfectionist, little bit crazed, very famous musician. And for him to tap you to play with him on anything, yeah, I think they made a record back in the day, Coltrane and Miles Davis. Baritone sax. Where have we heard of the baritone sax? Back in the bar in New Orleans. So he's saying, it seems appropriate that we play basically baritone sax music. Now that, to me, is a pretty obvious clue. It's somewhere around New Orleans, that they are going to New Orleans. Why would he bring up baritone sax player John Coltrane when our only previous reference to a baritone sax has been him talking about one in this jazz club, I guess it must have been, I was calling it a bar, in the French Quarter, right? So it's somewhere around New Orleans. I'm convinced of that. Do I think it's in the city? No. I think there's a caveat to saying this. I don't think it's in the city and that they would be in a hotel or something. I think he would bury it near a campground. Because again, he talks about how he was out and he was finding all these frogs and stuff when he would go out and kind of do what a lot of us did when we were 5, 6, and 7. I certainly did it. You go out and you find creeks or streams and you turn over rocks and you look at minnows, try to catch the minnows, or you catch crawdads, you catch all these animals that are everywhere. And he loved doing that, And so it seemed appropriate to listen to John Coltrane. I think it's kind of obvious. But, I don't know. This is my opinion. When we arrived at now, they're literally going out to plant the box in this fanciful scenario where he's got these Pokemon with him, guiding him, helping him. When we arrived at our hiking spot, the weather was sweltering. Well, wouldn't it be? Maybe high summer wasn't the best time to hide this treasure after all. Yeah, if you're around New Orleans somewhere, I would say it would be pretty damn sweltering. The air felt hotter than a Scheherazad's breath. That's another Pokemon character. But the Froakie didn't seem to mind. He told me not to worry. He said it would be unlikely we would encounter any fire Pokemon along the way. Fire Pokemon? I'm not that familiar with Pokemon, but I know one thing. I know they kind of have their niches. Like Froakie is considered like a water Pokemon, and Greninja is probably a water Pokemon because he's an evolution of Froakie. And then, of course, if they have fire Pokemon, well, what do we know about fire? Fire and water don't mix. So he's essentially saying, whatever these things are, these fire Pokemon, we're not going to have to worry about those. So I don't know where they would reside, but I would assume fire Pokemon would not reside near the water. So that's another clue to me that this is definitely going to be a watery environment that this treasure is hidden in. Then he said, now this is interesting too. At that moment, then I heard a loud noise. I could have sworn it sounded like a Mabasa. But the Froakie, pointing to a sign, said that was unlikely too. And we won't see any Bouffalon either. Now, Bouffalon, I did look up. It's kind of it's based on the buffalo character. It kind of looks like a buffalo. Well, those are not water creatures either. And this Mubasa, I'm going to assume, is not either. It's funny when he said but the Froakie pointing to a sign said that was unlikely too. We won't see any Bouffalon either. Just so you know, I didn't tell him I already knew this, as I'd done at least a modicum of research before we left. I was just happy to see Froakie so engaged. Then he thinks he sees some Obstagoons, but Froakie convinces him that they're just raccoons, regular old raccoons. Basically, Froakie runs off for a minute, and he says, okay, at this point, the path becomes increasingly shaded. Again, folks, I think he's literally giving you clues about the terrain you're going to be walking through. We know he's near water at this point, but suddenly he says the path has become increasingly shaded. That helped with the heat. The landscape was mysterious and hauntingly gorgeous. He sees some other Pokemon characters. I continued on some ways more. One of my fish just hit the surface pretty hard. That was funny. I mean, they're just little miniature catfish and one American flagfish in this one tank. And boy, but when those mini catfish, man, they'll just dart to the surface for a breath of air or something. Man, they just pop like a bass. If you're bass fishing, they'll boop. You know, you can hear them hit the water. All right. Just then, I heard a quick snap. I turned around. The Froakie had suddenly reappeared. He hopped from one rock to another. That tells me he's hopping on rocks in water. I mean, if you're on land walking along a rocky path, you don't go, oh, you're jumping from one rock to the other on the dirt. But people say that. You know what it's like when you get in water and you need to traverse it without getting your feet wet, and you see rocks and you can hop from one rock to the other. And then he says, oh, he had brought a Greninja with him. I was so happy to see them that I almost fell off my rock. So he's now sitting on a rock, possibly a rock in the water, possibly a rock on the edge of the water. But I definitely get the concept of people hopping on rocks in the water. I opened my backpack, took out the treasure box, and he showed the Pokemon his treasure, and they were suitably impressed. And he showed them the frog that was in the treasure, and they were really excited because, of course, they're these Pokemon who are water-based creatures. So here in the treasure is I think it's a jade frog you're going to get. It has red eyes, pretty cool looking. Fabergé. It was a Fabergé animal carving, so it'll be quite expensive. And they were all, of course, very excited because it's a frog, and Froke's a frog, and the Greninja's kind of a frog, and the Jared, what's the other guy that came with him? Well, I don't care. I'm not going to get into that. As I followed, each step began to remind me of being 5 years old again. What was happening when he was 5 years old? He was traveling on this trip, and at one point in New Orleans, I'm convinced, from the Jayco trailer, not from when they spent the night in the hotel, I'm assuming somewhere in or around a campground in or around New Orleans. That's what he's talking about. And I believe he is back in New Orleans area. Now, there are campgrounds in New Orleans City proper. I looked at them. The vast majority are, kind of gravel roads, small. I mean, the cooler ones, I'm sure, would be outside of the town limit, where you get more, maybe bigger and rural, maybe more access to water. Because obviously, I believe when he was a kid, he talked about on this 14-day trip, he was always out turning over rocks, looking for crawfish, and he was seeing frogs and blah, blah, blah. I just think it's a campground in or outside of the city limits of New Orleans. But there are a lot of them. So that, again, is when you have to start doing more research. Now, I've done a little, but I'm not going to talk about it. I'll tell you that. Do your own research on that. If you want to go to Google Maps and look for campgrounds in and around New Orleans, you try to figure out if there's something in Google Maps that will clue you into where he might have decided to plant the box. Because remember, he said, somewhere in this book, he says, I first looked at the maps, and I decided where in, this particular trip, he said he's going to put it somewhere he traveled on that 14-day trip. So we know that. But we also know it's a very big expanse, that big circle, Statesville, North Carolina, Louisiana, Texas, back up through the Ozarks. You have to stop somewhere there and understand what's going on. Now, this is interesting, and I think these are very important passages. He pulled out a trading card and he showed it to the Pokemons that were with him, Froke and the other guy. He says a Greninja informed me he knew every corner of the area. Very important, right? We reverse course. Now the Greninja is taking him to the place to put the box. Each step began to remind me of being 5 years old again. The forest opened up. So now we're seeing a forest opening up. An eagle greeted us. Minnows decorated the water's edge. I even got to witness a few Magikarp conversing with a Seeking. I don't know what that means. Nature was alive all around us. The Greninja introduced me to a wise golem who happened to have a great idea about where we could hide the treasure. Very important. We circled back. Well, now he's going in one direction. The Greninja says, oh, I know where to hide it. Let's go back. They reverse. And then suddenly they meet a golem, and he says he knows where to hide it. And so we circled back. I wonder if they meant we circled back to where they were when the Greninja said he knew where to hide it. It's a little confusing. We left the box. They have planted the box that we're looking for. We left the box not far from a place where locals turn up from time to time. I was glad I had taken a bunch of pictures so I wouldn't forget this incredible day. We left the box not far from a place where locals turn up from time to time. These are pretty good clues, folks. But obviously, just like Forrest Fenn's treasure hunt, still kind of open-ended. I mean, you have to dig a little more to figure out what that really means. It's somewhere near water. It's somewhere near water. And don't forget, when they were first going out, the Frokie pointed to a sign saying it's unlikely we'll see a Mimosa or a Bouffalon either. A sign. So there's a sign there that probably has something to do with water or something, which would indicate to Frokie that you're not going to see any non-water Pokemon. And he ends up being partnered up with water Pokemon. So I just say it's water. I don't think there's any confusion. And then, of course, this is where it gets really interesting. Oh yeah, we're almost done. But I have made, let's put it this way, I have made a case for myself. If you don't like my ideas, of course you can blow them off and think I'm wrong. I think on a general level, he has painted a very clear path to New Orleans. But obviously, as he says, and is always true, just like with Forrest Fenn, it's going to be getting there and figuring out to do boots on the ground. I think JCB is going to get you to spots. It takes a little bit of thought to get there, but just the way he has set this up with the talking about the saxophones, kind of obvious to me, saying, remember New Orleans, go back to New Orleans. Talking about this, and I'm talking about when I was 5.5. It's just like when I was 5, and you're going, yeah, you were 5 on that trip. And, you were outside and you were turning over rocks and finding crawdads and shit. I'm not saying it's even the exact same campground, but I think he's in a campground somewhere near New Orleans. Or even in New Orleans. There are campgrounds in New Orleans, but a lot of them are, a lot of them in the urban area. If you can look at them, there's no water around them at all. So you have to find one that maybe has water, or you go outside of the city and you find one that has water. Because campgrounds are all over. As the afternoon rolled into early evening, it sadly became time to leave. He's talking about we're now leaving, having left the box, the treasure box. We're now leaving. The Frokie said he liked this area so much he wanted to stay. Frokie is a water creature, so it is, again, not to belabor it, but it's water area. I bowed to my friend in appreciation and left him the jar of flies for him. I shook hands with the Greninja and the Golem. Then, saying a final goodbye to all my friends, I started to walk back towards where we'd begun our day. That night, I opened the phone to review the pictures I had taken. To my dismay, almost every photo I'd shot was terribly overexposed. Perhaps it had something to do with taking photographs of expanded reality. I had no idea. Expanded reality sounds a lot like a euphemism for augmented reality. And what is augmented reality? Augmented reality is when you're looking at the reality in front of you, whether it's your home inside, or you're on a city street like Pokemon Go when it came out and they were all out looking for Pokemons in the streets of Portland because the program would have them hiding behind mailboxes, etc. It's very cool. I have to get it augmented reality. I really do. But, I don't know. I have enough stuff going on. I really do. I don't work much anymore. The IT work I was doing at Field Nation, I just don't do it much anymore. Financially, it seems kind of, I don't know. It's kind of fun to get out there and stuff, but it just seems increasingly less important to me. Well, that's a long story. I could actually talk about that in another Field Nation thing. It's changed a lot. The jobs being offered have changed a lot. I think some of the jobs I used to do are now just being handled by restaurant management and stuff. Because I remember I used to tell people, someone asked me about it, I said, it's kind of monkey-do work. You're kind of going, you're replacing a register, you're upgrading the software, you're doing all this stuff. You work with someone on the phone or remote. And yeah, the money wasn't bad, but I remember on a couple of occasions having managers or employees of restaurants, like I used to do a lot of work at Bojangles, and they'd say, yeah, They want me to do it. You know, they want me to do it, what you're doing. And I said, no, I don't. No, I'm not an IT guy. And I'm thinking to myself, well, it's really pretty simple if you just listen to the guy on the phone. But then I thought, why argue? I just keep coming doing the simple work. And now that's happening far less. It's much more network work, and you know, things like replacing register. I still see them once in a while, but I don't know. I want to do other stuff. I'm just doing other stuff. But anyway, I think some of those jobs now are just being handled by employees, which is fine. Okay, so he says, open my phone to review the pictures I took while I was out dropping off the box, hiding it. To my dismay, almost every photo I shot was terribly overexposed. Maybe it had something to do with taking photographs of expanded reality. I had no idea. Oddly, only one picture was preserved. Well enough to make any sense out of it. I don't even remember taking this photo, though I do reckon it was closer to the end of our day. Well, the end of the day, of course, is when they planted the treasure, and then he turned back. This snapshot is now the only evidence that any of this adventure ever happened at all. I felt the least I could do was share it with you in this book. All right. The end of that chapter. Very cool. I really like the way JCB thinks. I really do. He's a cool guy. And I really like the way he's presenting it on this channel. I mean, this book. And then this book. In this chapter. And I think I'm going to feel the same way about the other chapters. I really feel like the Forrest Fenn chapter is also going to be fairly easy to figure out where to go. But I haven't really studied it like I studied this Pokemon one. I also think that the Appalachian Trail one might have a bit of a trick in it. And it has to do with scale and perspective. Although, as I said at the beginning, I think the guy who found that little thing in Vermont that was great detective work to find that, because it's pretty obvious it is there, or at least it should. I mean, it really should be. And now people are saying, well, maybe it's a red herring. Maybe he did it to throw. You know what? If you want to go into that, then everything's a red herring. Could be a red herring, and then you're immobilized, you're paralyzed, because you're like, well, that could be a trick. That could, and then you stop. I can't think like that, and I didn't think that way during the Forrest Fenn hunt. I had to settle on a course and go do it. And anyway, I just think this Pokemon one looks really cool. My final thought, to reiterate what I've already said, I believe the Pokemon box is near New Orleans, near a campground where people come and go. I believe there is a sign somewhere there that has maybe to do with the waters. Maybe it says something like, be careful around the water. Maybe they have, for all I know, maybe they have alligator problems or something. I don't know what it's like. I've never been to, have I been to Louisiana? I don't think so. I was on a big project back in 16 or 17 where I was all over the United States. But I don't think I was ever in Louisiana. But we know it's bayou. I mean, it's southern, wet, lowland country. So maybe if I went to a campground and I immediately saw, and I was near a body of water, which I would want to be, I would be searching for before I even went to it. And I see a sign, something, watch out for alligators or something, or whatever they have, right? Alligators here in the United States. I'd probably say, oh, we're on the right track. Yeah. That's just off the top of my head. Okay, folks, I have nothing more to say. All right, everybody, have fun. I'm pretty convinced I'm right about New Orleans, campgrounds in or around New Orleans. And I could see going for it at some point. Not soon, because I have to figure out logistics now that are a little more difficult for me than they used to be when I was going out to the Forrest Fenn, to the Rockies. But we'll see what happens. And I'd like really to put my time and effort into the Appalachian Trail one, because that's what I'm close to. I hiked the Appalachian Trail, I think, 3 times as a teenager. Also spent a day or night with a friend in the George Washington National Forest, which I'm not, because I grew up in Virginia. So where was that? Was that Georgia? Or was that West Virginia? Or was that Virginia? Might have been Virginia. I don't even remember. What you don't care. Okay, everybody, have a great day. And talk to you in the next one. Bye.